The Super Bowl is the most high-profile sporting event of the year. Thousands of fans flock to the stadium. Millions watch the broadcast around the world. But this time, one guy got a chance that others could only dream of. He was an ordinary fan who loved football and movies. He couldn't even imagine spending that evening in a VIP box with Keanu Reeves himself. But when the stadium erupted with joy after the first touchdown, he noticed that Keanu looked worried. He wasn't looking at the field. He was looking for something in the crowd. And that's when the fan realized that he was part of a story that would not be shown on the broadcast. Keanu Reeves sat in the back of a blacked-out SUV, the engine humming beneath him as the driver navigated the quiet streets of Washington, D.C. He had always trusted his instincts, but the deeper he dug into the mystery surrounding Flight 4378, the more uneasy he became. There were too many gaps, too many convenient explanations that led nowhere. And worst of all, there was no trace of the Black Hawk that had nearly caused one of the worst aviation disasters in recent history. He glanced at his phone, the same search queries glaring back at him, the same lack of results. It was as if the entire incident had been erased from existence, leaving behind only whispers and half-formed theories. But Keanu knew better. Something, or someone, was ensuring that the world forgot about what had happened. The question was, why? Back at the Pentagon, the meeting had ended, but the weight of its conclusion lingered. The transmission, *** mission aborted. They saw us. *** wasn't just an anomaly. It was proof. Proof that the Black Hawk had been there on purpose. Proof that it had been pulled away the moment Flight 4378's pilot spotted it. But even that wasn't the most disturbing part. Someone had covered it up before the world could ask questions. At the National Transportation Safety Board, an independent investigation had begun, though with limited access. Key pieces of data had already been sealed, radar logs overwritten with generic flight paths that showed nothing out of the ordinary. Even seasoned investigators were beginning to question whether they were chasing a ghost. Keanu's SUV pulled into the underground parking lot of a discreet government building. He stepped out, adjusting his jacket, and took the elevator to the 8th floor, where a dimly lit hallway led to a single unmarked office. He knocked once. The door opened just enough for a pair of cautious eyes to peer through before it swung open fully. Inside, a man in his late 50s sat behind a cluttered desk, stacks of classified files surrounding him like a fortress. "I was wondering when you'd show up," the man muttered, motioning for Keanu to sit. Keanu studied him. Former intelligence, most likely. The kind of person who had seen too much but had been discarded when his usefulness had run out. The nameplate on the desk, simply Reed Barrett. "You were supposed to be on that flight," Barrett said matter-of-factly. "That's why you're here." Keanu nodded. There was no point in denying it. Barrett exhaled, running a hand over his stubbled chin. "What do you know so far?" Keanu hesitated. "I know that a Black Hawk appeared where it shouldn't have been. I know that air traffic control was blind to it until the last second. And I know that someone made sure it disappeared." Barrett nodded approvingly. "Good. But you don't know the real question you should be asking." Keanu narrowed his eyes. "Which is, who was on board that helicopter?" Silence filled the room. It wasn't something Keanu had considered. Not fully. He had been so focused on the event itself that he had overlooked the most crucial detail. The Black Hawk wasn't just a rogue aircraft. It was transporting someone. Someone important enough to rewrite the truth. Across the city, at an undisclosed location, a team of specialists sat in front of glowing monitors, watching and rewatching the limited footage they had been able to recover. The grainy images told a story that no official report ever would. A helicopter lingering in restricted airspace. A commercial flight forced into a maneuver that had defied the odds. A sudden retreat. Not an accident, but an order. The pieces were there, waiting to be put together. And Keanu Reeves, whether he wanted to or not, was now part of the puzzle. Because the closer he got to the truth, the more he realized he wasn't the only one asking questions. And that meant he wasn't the only one in danger. The crowd roared as the first touchdown was scored, but Timothy barely registered the excitement. His eyes were locked on Keanu Reeves, who sat at the edge of his seat, his expression unreadable. The man who had extended this unbelievable invitation wasn't absorbed in the game. He was watching something else, something unseen to the average eye. Timothy followed Keanu's gaze, scanning the stadium, but he saw only the chaos of fans dressed in team colors, celebrating the electrifying moment. Yet something about Keanu's behavior set off an alarm in his mind. The effortless calmness the actor had carried upon arrival was gone, replaced by a quiet intensity that suggested anticipation, or maybe concern. The suite was designed for comfort and exclusivity, stocked with gourmet food and expensive champagne. Waitstaff moved with practiced grace, ensuring the guests had everything they needed. Yet, despite the luxury, Timothy felt uneasy, as if he were standing at the edge of something far greater than just a football game. Then the lights flickered. It was a barely noticeable change, a small disturbance in the seamless experience of the Super Bowl. A few people murmured, but no one paid it much attention. The stadium's energy didn't falter. The game continued uninterrupted, and everything appeared normal. But Timothy saw how Keanu's shoulders tensed, how his hands subtly reached for the inside pocket of his coat, how his eyes locked onto something, or someone, in the upper levels of the stadium. Timothy turned his head to follow Keanu's focus, but saw nothing unusual at first. Then, amid the thousands of spectators, a figure stood out. A man in a dark suit, motionless while the rest of the crowd moved with excitement. He wasn't cheering, wasn't watching the game. He was watching the suite. A shiver ran down Timothy's spine. He wasn't sure why, but something about the man's presence felt wrong. He tried to shake the thought. Maybe it was security, maybe it was just an important guest with no interest in football. But when the lights flickered again, and Keanu abruptly stood, Timothy knew for certain that something was off. Keanu moved with quiet urgency, making his way toward the exit of the suite without a word. Timothy hesitated before standing to follow, heart pounding. The game was forgotten, the excitement of the Super Bowl fading into the background as an entirely different tension filled the air. Down the private corridors of the stadium, Keanu walked with purpose, his pace quick but controlled. Timothy trailed behind, unsure whether he should be following, unsure whether he had just stepped into something far beyond himself. As they moved through the tunnels beneath the stands, the sound of the stadium grew distant, replaced by the steady hum of industrial lighting and the occasional murmur of security personnel stationed at restricted access points. Timothy's mind raced. What had he walked into? What was Keanu looking for? Then Keanu stopped. Ahead at the far end of the hallway, the man from the stands now stood waiting, hands in his pockets, his face still unreadable. He said nothing. He simply stood there, his presence commanding. Timothy's breath hitched. He expected Keanu to say something, to ask who he was, to demand answers. But instead, Keanu exhaled, his expression unreadable. Then, the man in the suit spoke first. "You shouldn't have come here, Reeves." Timothy's pulse pounded in his ears. Whatever this was, it wasn't about football. It never had been, and he was now in the middle of it. Timothy's breath came in short gasps as he sprinted through the dimly lit maintenance passage. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, drowning out the distant roar of the Super Bowl crowd. He had no idea where he was running to. All he knew was that he had to keep moving. The footsteps behind him were relentless. He could hear them echoing in the corridor, closing in. Whoever these men were, they weren't ordinary security. They moved with precision, not like stadium staff trying to catch a lost fan, but like professionals used to hunting targets. Timothy turned a sharp corner, barely avoiding slipping on the smooth concrete. Ahead, the hallway split into multiple paths. His mind raced. Left or right? He had no time to decide. He chose left, hoping it wouldn't lead to a dead end. The corridor stretched longer than he expected. Pipes hissed overhead, steam rising from the vents. He barely noticed the dull flickering of fluorescent lights, his focus set only on escape. But just as hope flickered, he spotted a metal door at the end of the passageway, marked authorized personnel only. He had no choice. With one final desperate push, he lunged at the door, grabbing the handle. It didn't budge. Locked. His stomach dropped. The footsteps were nearly upon him now. He spun around, searching for anything, a weapon, an alternate escape route, something. Then he saw it, a small service panel beside the door. A keypad. He didn't know the code, but he had to try. His fingers trembled as he jabbed at the numbers. Random guesses. 1-2-3-4? No 0-0-0-0-0. Denied. Another failed attempt. The screen flashed red. warning him of an impending security lockdown. One more wrong input, and he'd be trapped for good. Then he heard something that sent a chill down his spine. The footsteps had stopped. Timothy swallowed hard, his body frozen as he realized his pursuers weren't running anymore. They were waiting. He turned his head slightly, peering down the hallway. The figures were there, standing at the far end of the corridor. Watching, not advancing, just waiting. Why? The silence stretched unbearably thick. Then, in the distance, another sound emerged. A steady, measured echo of approaching footsteps, different from the hurried ones that had been chasing him moments ago. Someone else was coming. His stomach twisted as the new presence grew closer. The suited men remained still, their heads subtly shifting toward the sound. Whatever they had been waiting for had arrived. And then he saw him. A tall figure emerged from the shadows of the corridor, walking slowly toward them. His presence was commanding, effortless. Unlike the other men in suits, this one exuded a different kind of authority. He wasn't here to chase. He was here to decide what happened next. Timothy's fingers clenched into fists. He didn't know who this man was, but something in his gut told him he wasn't just another hired enforcer. He was higher up the chain, someone who didn't need to run because he already had the advantage. The man stopped a few feet away from Timothy, his eyes cool and appraising. Then, in a voice smooth as polished steel, he finally spoke. "You were never meant to be here." Timothy swallowed hard, his back pressing against the locked door. He had nowhere to go. The man's gaze didn't waver. "But now that you are, we have a problem." Behind him, the suited men shifted subtly, waiting for a command. The tension in the air was suffocating. Timothy's mind raced. What was he supposed to do? There was no way out. He had no idea why Keanu had invited him, no clue what any of this meant. But one thing was clear. He had stumbled into something much bigger than himself, and he wasn't sure he'd be walking away. Timothy's breath was uneven, his pulse hammering in his ears. The suited men stood like statues, their expressions unreadable, their patience unnerving. The man in front of him, the one who had just spoken, was clearly the one in charge. There was a weight to his presence, a gravity that pulled the entire scene into sharp focus. "You were never meant to be here," the man repeated, his voice devoid of emotion. Timothy swallowed, his back pressed against the locked door. The keypad next to him still blinked red, his failed attempts lingering on the screen like a death sentence. The walls of the dimly lit maintenance passage seemed to close in on him, trapping him in a space that offered no escape. He had no idea how he got here. One moment, he was at the Super Bowl, sitting in a luxury suite next to Keanu Reeves. The next, he was running for his life beneath the stadium, stumbling into something far bigger than himself. The man in the suit studied him, his sharp features betraying no sign of impatience, as if he already knew how this would play out. "You have two options," he said, stepping forward. "You walk out of here, forget everything you've seen, and go back to your life." Timothy's throat was dry. "And the second option?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small device, a black rectangle, sleek and unmarked. He held it up between his fingers. "You come with us." Timothy's stomach churned. Every instinct screamed at him to choose the first option. To run, to forget, to pretend none of this had happened. But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. Even if he left now, they wouldn't let him go. Not really. He had seen too much. He had been brought into something he didn't understand. "Why me?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. The suited man finally let a small smirk touch his lips. "That's what we're going to find out." Before Timothy could respond, another sound echoed through the hallway, the unmistakable click of a safety being released. The air in the passage shifted. The suited men turned, moving instinctively into defensive positions. And then, from the darkness of the hallway, Keanu Reeves emerged. His movements were deliberate, his eyes cold. He held a pistol steady in his grip, but there was no panic in his stance, only certainty. "You're not taking him," Keanu said, voice steady. The man in the suit sighed, as if this were an inconvenience rather than a genuine threat. "Reeves," he murmured, "you always find your way into things that don't concern you." Keanu's gaze didn't waver. "He's with me." Timothy's head spun. He had no idea what was happening, no idea how Keanu had known where to find him. But in that moment, it didn't matter. The tension in the air was unbearable, the stillness before the storm. Then, without warning, everything exploded into motion. Keanu moved first. The crack of a gunshot shattered the air. Timothy barely had time to react as chaos unfolded around him. The suited men lunged, moving with military precision. Keanu twisted, evading, countering. The passageway turned into a war zone. Fists colliding, bodies shifting, gunfire ricocheting off the walls. Timothy dropped to the ground, covering his head as a stray bullet shattered the keypad beside him. Sparks flew, and the metal door hissed open. An escape. Keanu saw it too. In an instant, he was at Timothy's side, yanking him through the doorway before slamming the door shut behind them. They ran. Down another passage, up a flight of stairs. The roar of the stadium grew louder. Timothy's legs burned, his breath ragged, but he didn't stop. They burst into an open hallway, one leading straight back to the public areas of the stadium. Security guards turned in surprise, but Keanu didn't slow. He pulled Timothy forward, weaving through the crowd of oblivious fans still caught up in the excitement of the game. They didn't stop moving until they were outside, the cool night air hitting Timothy like a slap to the face. Only then did Keanu finally release his grip. Timothy staggered, his mind struggling to catch up. What the hell was that? Keanu didn't answer immediately. He scanned the area, making sure they hadn't been followed. Then, he turned back to Timothy. "We need to get out of here," Keanu said. "Now!" Timothy nodded, even though his mind was still spinning. He didn't understand any of this. Why he had been targeted, why Keanu was involved, why this felt bigger than just a football game. But one thing was clear. This was far from over. The night air burned in Timothy's lungs as he followed Keanu through the dimly lit streets surrounding the stadium. The deafening echoes of the Super Bowl crowd still roared behind them. But here, in the empty alleys and deserted parking lots, everything felt eerily quiet. Keanu moved with purpose, never hesitating, his eyes scanning the surroundings like a man who had done this before. Timothy, on the other hand, struggled to keep up, his mind still reeling from the encounter beneath the stadium. The gunfire, the men in suits, the way Keanu had handled himself like he had been preparing for this moment his entire life. Finally, after several blocks of silence, Keanu pulled Timothy into a side alley, pressing a firm hand against his chest to stop him. The dim glow of a streetlight barely illuminated their surroundings. Keanu exhaled sharply, his expression unreadable. "We need to get off the grid," Keanu finally said, his voice calm but urgent. "They won't stop looking for us." Timothy's breath hitched. "Who are they?" Keanu didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket, pulling out a small, black device, the same one the suited man had shown earlier. Timothy hadn't gotten a good look at it before, but now he could see the sleek, unmarked surface, the faint glow of an embedded light pulsing in a slow rhythm. "This," Keanu said, holding it up between two fingers, "is why you were invited." Timothy's stomach dropped. He had assumed this was all some random twist of fate, an accidental brush with something he was never supposed to see. But now Keanu was telling him otherwise. "I don't understand," Timothy said, voice hoarse. "I don't have anything to do with this." Keanu's gaze sharpened. "Yes, you do." Before Timothy could protest, Keanu continued. "That invitation you got, it wasn't random. Someone sent it knowing you would be here. They wanted you to see something, and they wanted me to find you." Timothy's head spun. None of this made sense. He was just a normal guy, just a football fan who had won what he thought was the opportunity of a lifetime. But now, as he stood in a dark alley with Keanu Reeves telling him he was part of something bigger, he wasn't sure what was real anymore. Footsteps echoed in the distance. Keanu tensed, pocketing the device quickly. He grabbed Timothy's wrist, pulling him deeper into the shadows. "They're tracking this," Keanu murmured. "We need to move." They took off again, weaving through the empty streets. Timothy's legs ached, but adrenaline kept him from slowing. Whatever was happening, it was real. He was in it now. Keanu led them to an abandoned warehouse at the edge of the city. The metal doors groaned as he forced them open, revealing a darkened interior littered with old shipping containers and rusting equipment. Only when they were inside did Keanu let out a breath, closing the doors behind them. "All right," Keanu said, running a hand through his hair. Let's figure out why they want you so badly. Timothy collapsed onto an overturned crate, still trying to catch his breath. He watched as Keanu pulled the black device out again, placing it carefully on a nearby table. The faint glow pulsed steadily, casting eerie shadows around the room. This is some kind of encrypted key, Keanu explained, tapping the surface lightly. It's used for high-level security access. Government, intelligence agencies, the kind of thing most people would never get their hands on. Timothy frowned. So why do they think I have anything to do with it? Keanu studied him for a long moment before speaking. That's what we need to find out. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant hum of the city outside. Timothy's mind raced. If someone had sent him that invitation on purpose, if he was meant to be here, then who was behind it? And why? As if sensing his thoughts, Keanu sighed. There's one way to get answers. Timothy looked up. How? Keanu's eyes darkened. We have to go to them before they come for us. Timothy swallowed hard. He knew what that meant. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning.